The text came through at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right as I was finishing up the foundation work on the Morrison job site. My hands were still covered in concrete dust when my phone buzzed with Diana's message. "My lover changed the locks. You're out. Let's see how tough you are now, haha." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I stared at that screen for a full minute, workers bustling around me, the sound of machinery fading into white noise. 23 years of marriage, and this is how it ends? With a text message and a laughing emoji? My name is Patrick Owen, and I've been a construction foreman in Millbrook, Maine for the better part of 30 years. I've built houses, torn them down, and rebuilt them stronger. I know the value of a solid foundation, the importance of reading blueprints carefully, and the satisfaction of a job well done. What I apparently didn't know was that my wife Diana had been planning to demolish our life together with the precision of a controlled explosion. The drive home felt like swimming through molasses. Every red light, every slow-moving truck seemed designed to delay the inevitable. Millbrook is one of those small Maine towns where everyone knows everyone's business, where secrets have the lifespan of morning dew, and where a man's reputation can be built over decades and destroyed in an afternoon. Our house, my house, the one I'd spent 5 years renovating with my own hands, sat on Maple Street like a postcard from better times. White clapboard siding, black shutters, a wraparound porch that I'd rebuilt plank by plank. The American dream in architectural form, except now it looked more like a crime scene. My belongings were scattered across the front lawn like debris after a tornado. Toolboxes, clothes, books, my father's old recliner, everything that made a house a home, now soaking in the October drizzle. Diana stood on the porch, arms crossed, wearing that smug expression I'd grown to hate over the past year. Beside her stood Theodore West, Esquire, local real estate attorney, and apparently the man who'd been warming my side of the bed. Theo was everything I wasn't. Soft hands, expensive suits, the kind of guy who'd never swung a hammer in anger or worked up an honest sweat. He wore his success like cologne, heavy and obvious. His silver BMW sat in my driveway, parked exactly where my pickup truck had sat for the past 5 years. "Patrick!" Diana called out as I climbed out of my truck, her voice carrying that fake cheerfulness she used when she wanted to twist the knife a little deeper. "I hope you don't mind, but Theo helped me redecorate. We thought the place needed a more sophisticated touch." Theo stepped forward, his chest puffed out like a rooster in a henhouse. "Owen, I tried to handle this through proper legal channels, but Diana insisted on the direct approach. You should have seen this coming." I looked at him, then at her, then at my waterlogged possessions scattered across the lawn. My neighbors were starting to gather. Ellen Morrison from next door, the Hendersons from across the street, old Pete from the corner house. In a town like Millbrook, a domestic drama was better than cable television. "Well," I said, keeping my voice level, "this is certainly direct." Diana's smile widened. "I knew you'd understand. You always were practical." What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd been practical about more than just accepting defeat. 5 years ago, during a rough patch in our marriage, I'd done something that seemed paranoid at the time, but now felt like divine inspiration. I'd restructured our mortgage. Instead of a traditional home loan, I'd convinced Diana to sign papers for what I'd described as a better interest rate. What I hadn't mentioned was that the new mortgage was actually a commercial loan with very specific terms. Terms that included a poison pill clause. If the primary borrower was removed from the property or prevented from residing there, the full balance became due immediately at an adjusted interest rate of 18%. Diana had signed without reading, trusting her practical husband to handle the boring financial details. Theo, for all his legal expertise, had apparently been too busy planning his romantic conquest to properly examine the paperwork when Diana asked him to just make sure everything looked right. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my daughter Rena. Phase 1 complete. Time for Phase 2. Well, I said, grabbing a box of my clothes from the wet grass. I guess I'll be going. You two enjoy the house. Diana looked almost disappointed by my calm reaction. That's it? No fighting? No begging? What would be the point? I loaded the box into my truck. You've made your choice. I respect that. Theo put his arm around Diana's waist, marking his territory. Smart man. This doesn't have to get ugly. I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. No, Theo, it really doesn't. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, standing together on the porch of their new love nest, probably already planning how to spend the equity I'd built up. They looked so happy, so satisfied with their clever little scheme. They had no idea that the real renovation was just beginning. My temporary apartment was a studio above Murphy's hardware store, a cramped space that smelled like sawdust and WD-40. It wasn't much, but it had been my secret refuge for the past 6 months, ever since I'd started suspecting Diana's after-work, pharmaceutical conferences were happening a little too close to Theo's downtown office. The beauty of being a contractor in a small town is that everyone needs something fixed and favors accumulate like interest. Murphy had needed help with a foundation issue last spring, and I'd handled it for free in exchange for keeping this place available. Call it insurance, call it paranoia. Either way, it was paying off now. Rena arrived at 7 sharp, carrying Chinese takeout and wearing the kind of grin that reminded me why I'd always been proud to be her father. At 25, she had her mother's looks, but thankfully none of her character flaws. She worked in IT for a Portland firm, which meant she understood both technology and the fine art of digital warfare. "Dad, you look terrible," she said, setting down the food. "But also kind of excited?" "Your mother always said I was a simple man," I replied, opening a container of lo mein. She just never understood exactly how simple. Rena pulled out her laptop. "Okay, walk me through this mortgage thing again. And this time, use small words. I'm good with computers, not real estate law." I spread the paperwork across my small table. 5 years ago, your mother and I hit a rough patch. She was talking about divorce, about taking half of everything I'd built. So I got creative. The documents told the story. What Diana thought was a simple refinance to get a better interest rate was actually a conversion from residential to commercial lending. The terms were buried in subsection 12 of a 40-page document, written in the kind of legal language that would put an insomniac to sleep. The key clause is right here. I pointed to a paragraph that looked innocuous enough. If the primary borrower is prevented from using the property as his primary residence, or if he's removed from the deed without his written consent, the loan converts to a demand note at prime plus 15%. Rena whistled low. And the current balance is $240,000. At 18% interest, that's about $43,000 a year, or roughly $3,600 a month in interest alone. Jesus, Dad. And they have to pay the full balance immediately? Within 30 days of notice, or the property goes into foreclosure. I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Your mother signed off on this, and Theo reviewed the paperwork when they started getting serious. He gave it his legal blessing. Rena was quiet for a moment, processing. This is either brilliant or completely insane. Why not both? She laughed, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Okay, so what's the timeline? I've already contacted my lawyer, Jim Gold. You remember him. He's sending the official notice tomorrow. Diana and Theo will have 30 days to come up with the full balance or lose the house. Can they get a new mortgage? Not likely. The property's been improved, but not enough to support a 240 loan, especially not with Theo's debt-to-income ratio. Plus, Diana's been living beyond her means for years. Her credit's not as solid as she thinks. Rena opened her laptop. Speaking of living beyond her means, you should see her social media lately. She's been posting pictures of expensive dinners, weekend trips, new jewelry, all tagged with location data, by the way. She turned the screen toward me. Diana's Instagram was a monument to conspicuous consumption. Dinner at Portland's most expensive restaurant, $90 a plate, a weekend in Boston, premium hotel, shopping on Newbury Street, a diamond bracelet that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. She's been spending like she already owns the house free and clear, I observed. Gets better. Look at the dates. Rena scrolled through the posts. This restaurant dinner? 3 days before she had you locked out? This shopping trip? Last weekend? She's been planning this for months, Dad. The evidence was all there. A digital trail of betrayal and financial irresponsibility. Diana had been living like a wealthy divorcee before the divorce, spending money she didn't have on a lifestyle she couldn't afford. There's something else, Rena said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. I did some digging into Theo's finances. Public records, you know. He's not as successful as he pretends to be. The documents she'd found painted a picture of a man living well beyond his means. Theo had 2 car payments, a boat loan, credit card debt, and a mortgage on his own condo that was underwater by about $50,000. His law practice was successful enough, but not support 2 households while paying off a $250,000 loan. Successful. They're broke, I said, understanding dawning. Worse than broke. They're broke and don't know it yet. My phone buzzed with a text from Kenny Morrison, my old friend and current drinking buddy. Heard about Diana. Meet me at Flanagan's. First round's on me. Flanagan's Pub was Millbrook's unofficial town hall, the place where reputations were made and destroyed over pints of Guinness and shots of Jameson. By the time I arrived, the story had already made the rounds. In a town of 3,000 people, news traveled faster than gossip, and gossip traveled at light speed. Kenny was waiting at our usual table, a bear of a man with graying hair and hands like ham hocks. He'd worked repo for 15 years before starting his own towing company, which meant he understood both the legal and practical sides of taking things away from people who couldn't pay for them. Pat, you look like hell, he said, sliding a beer across the table. But also like a man with a plan. That obvious? I've known you for 20 years. You're either planning something elaborate or you've finally snapped. Either way, I'm interested. I filled him in on the basics, keeping my voice low. Flanagan's had good acoustics, and the last thing I needed was the whole town knowing my strategy before Diana and Theo figured it out. Kenny listened without interruption, his expression growing more amused with each detail. When I finished, he was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. You magnificent bastard, he said, raising his glass. Here's to long-term planning and short-term memory. There's more, I said. I'm going to need some help with the practical aspects. Such as? Theo's got a classic Jaguar, 1967 E-Type, British racing green. Keeps it in the garage like it's the crown jewels. Kenny's grin widened. And I think it needs some mechanical attention. Nothing permanent, nothing criminal, just inconvenient. I like where this is going. Also, I think Diana's going to need some help moving her things out of the house when the time comes. Public service, really? Exactly. We spent the next hour planning what Kenny called Operation Practical Joke, a series of minor inconveniences and public embarrassments designed to make Diana and Theo's life difficult while staying well within legal boundaries. Nothing criminal, nothing that couldn't be explained as coincidence or bad luck. By the time I got back to my apartment, Rena had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Diana and Theo's financial situation. The picture it painted was even worse than I'd hoped. They're living paycheck to paycheck, she explained, showing me spreadsheets that would have made an accountant weep. Diana's been spending her entire salary on lifestyle expenses, and Theo's been floating his practice on credit cards and home equity loans. How long before they get the notice? Jim Gold said he'd serve it tomorrow morning. They'll have it by noon. I looked out the window at the October sky, dark clouds gathering for what the weather service was calling a significant storm system. In Maine, that could mean anything from heavy rain to an early blizzard. Either way, it seemed appropriate. Then we'd better get some sleep, I said. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. As Rena packed up her laptop, she paused at the door. Dad, are you sure about this? Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. I thought about Diana's smug smile, Theo's condescending tone, my belongings scattered across the lawn like trash. I thought about 23 years of marriage, 5 years of renovation work, and a lifetime of playing by the rules while other people cheated. Sweetheart, I said, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The call came at 11:47 a.m., just as I was finishing lunch at the job site. Diana's voice was shrill enough to cut glass, panic replacing the smug confidence I'd heard yesterday. Patrick, what the hell is this notice? What do you mean the mortgage is due in full? I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting her stew for a moment. Around me, the crew was pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. In a small town, a man's personal drama becomes community entertainment, whether he wants it or not. Which part are you having trouble with, Di? The part where you locked me out of my own house, or the part where actions have consequences? Don't play games with me. Theo says this is some kind of mistake. The mortgage isn't due for 15 years. Theo might want to read the paperwork more carefully. Section 12, subsection 4. You both signed off on it. There was a pause, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Theo's voice, getting louder and more agitated as the reality of the situation sank in. This is fraud, Diana shrieked. You tricked me into signing this. Fraud would require deception. I told you I was refinancing to get better terms. Lower monthly payments, remember? You just didn't ask about the other conditions. We'll fight this in court. With what lawyer? Theo's got a conflict of interest now, and good legal representation costs money. Money you don't have. The line went quiet except for Diana's heavy breathing. In the background, I could hear Theo's voice rising to what sounded like full-blown panic. Patrick, Diana said, her voice suddenly small and pleading. We can work this out. We don't have to be enemies. You're right, I agreed. We didn't have to be enemies. But you made that choice when you had my stuff thrown on the lawn like garbage. I hung up and went back to work, but my phone kept buzzing with increasingly desperate calls and texts. Diana, Theo, even some of Diana's friends who'd apparently been recruited to plead their case. I ignored them all. By evening, the story had spread through Millbrook like wildfire. At Flanagan's, I found myself holding court at the bar, buying rounds for anyone willing to listen to the tale of Diana's comeuppance. The general consensus was that I'd been wronged. Diana had gotten too big for her britches, and Theo was an outsider who'd gotten what he deserved. Always thought that woman was trouble, said Ellen Morrison, my neighbor who'd witnessed yesterday's lawn sale. Too fancy for her own good, if you ask me. And that lawyer, added Pete Henderson, driving around in that fancy car like he owns the town. About time someone took him down a peg. The crowd murmured agreement. In small-town Maine, there's nothing more satisfying than watching the mighty fall, especially when the mighty have been putting on airs. Kenny arrived around 9, wearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd completed a successful mission. He ordered a beer and settled in beside me at the bar. How'd it go? I asked quietly. Like clockwork. Sugar in the gas tank, all 4 tires flat, and homewrecker written in soap across the windshield. Nothing permanent, nothing criminal, just inconvenient. Anyone see you? Ellen Morrison. She was taking out her trash and happened to witness the whole thing. Terrible shame, random vandalism like that. Could have been anyone. I glanced over at Ellen, who raised her glass in a subtle toast. In a small town, justice often comes from unexpected directions. There's more, Kenny continued. Stop by the courthouse this afternoon. Public records, you know. Seems Theo's got some financial troubles of his own. 3 months behind on his condo payments, maxed out credit cards, and a boat loan he can't afford. Boat loan? 28-foot cabin cruiser. Legal Eagle, if you can believe that. Been trying to sell it for 6 months. No takers. The picture was getting clearer. Theo wasn't the successful attorney he pretended to be. He was a small-town lawyer living beyond his means, probably seeing Diana as his ticket to a better lifestyle. The house, with its built-up equity, would have been the perfect solution to his financial problems. Except now that equity was about to disappear faster than snow in July. My phone buzzed with another call from Diana. This time, I answered. "Patrick, please, we need to talk." "I'm listening. Not over the phone, in person. Tomorrow morning, at the house." "Your house, you mean? I'm not allowed there, remember?" "Please, this is important." I considered it. There was something in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Genuine fear. Not the manipulative pseudo-emotion she used to get her way, but real, bone-deep terror. "Fine. 10 a.m. But I'm bringing a witness." "Patrick, 10 a.m., Diana. With a witness or not at all." I hung up and turned to Kenny. "Feel like taking a drive tomorrow morning?" Wouldn't miss it for the world. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with the kind of October wind that cuts through your jacket and reminds you that winter's coming whether you're ready or not. Kenny picked me up in his tow truck, a not-so-subtle reminder of what happens to things people can't afford to keep. The house looked different in the morning light. What had seemed like a symbol of domestic betrayal yesterday now looked like what it actually was, a financial time bomb with a 30-day fuse. Diana and Theo were waiting on the porch, both looking like they'd aged 5 years overnight. Diana's usual perfect makeup was absent, replaced by dark circles and worry lines. Theo's expensive suit looked rumpled, like he'd slept in it. "Patrick," Diana began, "thank you for coming." "Don't thank me yet. You've got 28 days left on that notice. What's your plan?" Theo stepped forward, trying to reclaim some of his earlier bravado. "We're going to refinance. Get a conventional mortgage, pay off the commercial loan." "With what income? Diana makes decent money, but not enough to qualify for a $250,000 mortgage. And your debt-to-income ratio?" I shook my head. "No bank's going to touch you." "We'll find a way," Diana said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe you'll spend the next 28 days scrambling for a solution that doesn't exist, watching your credit get destroyed in the process." Kenny spoke up for the first time. "Shame about your car, Theo. Vandalism's getting bad around here." Theo's face flushed red. "You son of a—" "Careful," I warned. "Kenny here's got a temper, and he's been known to hold grudges. Wouldn't want any more accidents." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Not criminal, not actionable, but clear enough to understand. "What do you want?" Diana asked, cutting through the posturing. "Want? I don't want anything, Di. I've got everything I need." "There has to be something. Some way to work this out." I pretended to consider it, letting hope flicker in her eyes before crushing it. "You know what? There is one thing." I paused, watching them both lean forward eagerly. "I want you to understand what it felt like to come home and find my life scattered on the lawn like garbage. I want you to know what it's like to lose everything you've worked for because someone you trusted decided you weren't worth basic human decency." Diana's face crumpled. "Patrick, I'm sorry. I was angry. I wasn't thinking clearly." "No," I cut her off. "You were thinking very clearly. You planned this for months. The expensive dinners, the shopping trips, the jewelry. You were spending money you thought you'd get from selling this house. You counted your chickens before they hatched, and now it's time to pay the bill." Theo tried one last desperate gambit. "This is extortion. We'll take you to court." "Go ahead. Take me to court for enforcing a legal contract that you reviewed and approved. Sue me for expecting my wife to honor her commitments. I'm sure that'll go great for your legal career." The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He slumped against the porch railing, finally understanding that there was no clever legal maneuver that would save them. 28 days, I repeated, walking back toward Kenny's truck. Better start packing. As we drove away, I could see them in the side mirror, standing on the porch of the house they'd thought they'd stolen, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. You know, Kenny said, I almost feel sorry for them. Almost? Yeah. Then I remember how smug they looked yesterday, and the feeling passes. I laughed, and for the first time in months, it felt completely genuine. The foundation was laid, the framework was in place, and now all that remained was to watch the structure collapse under its own weight. In construction, we call it controlled demolition. In life, I call it justice. The Millbrook Autumn Festival had been a town tradition for over 50 years, a weekend-long celebration of small-town life featuring craft booths, carnival rides, and enough fried food to clog the arteries of a small army. This year, it was also going to serve as the perfect stage for Act 2 of Diana and Theo's public humiliation. 3 weeks had passed since the mortgage notice, and their situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. Rena's digital surveillance showed a trail of rejected loan applications, maxed-out credit cards, and increasingly frantic phone calls to anyone who might lend them money. Diana had even reached out to her estranged sister in California, a conversation that had apparently ended with some very creative profanity. Theo's law practice was suffering too. Word had gotten around about his personal financial troubles, and clients were starting to question whether a lawyer who couldn't manage his own money should be trusted with theirs. 2 major clients had already jumped ship, taking their retainers with them. I was manning the volunteer fire department's beer tent when Diana made her grand entrance on Saturday afternoon. She'd dressed for battle, designer jeans, expensive boots, and enough makeup to paint a barn. Her strategy was apparently to rally public sympathy by playing the wronged wife, abandoned by her cruel husband in her hour of need. It might have worked in a different town, with different people. But Millbrook had already chosen sides, and Diana was outnumbered about 3,000 to 2. Patrick Owen, you should be ashamed of yourself, she announced loudly enough for half the festival to hear. Throwing your wife out on the street like some kind of criminal. The crowd that gathered was substantial and largely unsympathetic. These were working people who'd watched Diana put on airs for years, who'd seen her turn up her nose at town events and local businesses. Her sudden desire for their support rang about as hollow as a campaign promise. Seems to me, called out Betty Walsh from the Methodist church booth, that you threw yourself out when you took up with that lawyer fellow. That's different, Diana protested. Patrick drove me to it with his neglect and his drinking. That was news to me, and apparently to everyone else who'd ever seen me nurse a single beer through an entire evening at Flanagan's. The crowd murmured skeptically. Ellen Morrison stepped forward, and I knew Diana was about to get both barrels. Ellen had been the unofficial neighborhood watch for 30 years, and she had a memory like a steel trap when it came to other people's business. Neglect? Ellen's voice carried the authority of someone who'd witnessed the truth firsthand. That man spent 5 years renovating your house with his own hands, working weekends and evenings after putting in full days at his regular job, and drinking, Patrick Owen's the most sober man in town. You don't know what goes on behind closed doors, Diana shot back, but her voice was losing conviction. I know what goes on in front yards, Ellen replied, like when you had all his belongings thrown out on the lawn for the whole neighborhood to see. Real classy behavior for someone who thinks she's better than the rest of us. The crowd was turning actively hostile now. In small-town Maine, there are unwritten rules about how you treat people, and Diana had broken most of them. Worse, she'd broken them publicly and with obvious satisfaction. That's when Theo made his entrance, looking like a man walking to his own execution. His face was pale, his expensive suit wrinkled, and he moved with the defeated shuffle of someone who'd run out of options. Diana, he said quietly, we need to go. No, I'm not going to let him destroy our lives without a fight. Our lives are already destroyed, Theo replied, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. The bank called this morning. They won't extend the loan, they won't refinance, and they won't negotiate. We have 5 days to come up with $240,000 or lose the house. The admission sent a ripple of satisfaction through the crowd. Nothing quite like watching the mighty fall, especially when the mighty had been putting on airs. Diana's composure finally cracked. This is all your fault, she screamed at me. You planned this. You set us up. I set you up? I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. Diana, I didn't make you cheat on your husband. I didn't make you spend money you didn't have on a lifestyle you couldn't afford. And I certainly didn't make you throw my belongings on the lawn like garbage. You tricked me into signing those papers. I refinanced our mortgage to get better terms. You signed the papers because you trusted me to handle our finances, which I'd been doing successfully for 23 years. The only thing I'm guilty of is planning ahead. Rena appeared at my elbow, smartphone in hand. Actually, Dad, there's something else you should know about. She held up her phone, showing Diana's Instagram feed from the past month. The evidence was damning. Expensive dinners, shopping sprees, jewelry, weekend trips, all posted with gleeful captions about her new life and upgraded lifestyle. This is from 3 weeks ago, Rena announced to the crowd. 2 days before she locked my father out of his own house. Dinner at Le Bernardin in Portland, $200 for 2 people. And this is from last weekend, a $1,000 shopping spree in Boston. The crowd pressed closer, looking at the evidence of Diana's financial irresponsibility. In a town where most people clipped coupons and shopped sales, such conspicuous consumption was almost offensive. She's been planning this for months, Rena continued, living like she was already divorced and had gotten half of everything Dad worked for, except she forgot to actually get divorced first. Diana lunged for the phone, but Rena stepped back smoothly. It's all public, Diana. You posted it yourself. Living my best life, upgraded lifestyle, my new beginnings. Pretty clear timeline of premeditation. That's when Diana completely lost it. She turned on me with fury that was probably years in the making, swinging her purse like a medieval flail. I caught her wrist easily. Construction work keeps you strong, and held it while she struggled. Let me go! Let me go, you bastard! Diana, I said quietly, you're making a scene. She looked around at the crowd of neighbors and townspeople, all watching her public meltdown with a mixture of fascination and disgust. The realization that she'd just destroyed what little sympathy she might have had seemed to hit her like cold water. This isn't over, she hissed, jerking her wrist free. Yes, it is, I replied. It's been over for a long time. You just didn't want to admit it. Diana and Theo retreated through the crowd, which parted for them like they were carrying something contagious. The general mood was one of satisfied justice. The high and mighty had been brought low, and by their own actions no less. Kenny appeared with 2 beers and a grin that could have lit up the midway. Well, that was entertaining. What's next? Next, we wait. 5 more days, and this whole thing resolves itself. And if they somehow come up with the money? I thought about Theo's maxed-out credit cards, Diana's destroyed credit rating, and the trail of rejected loan applications Rena had documented. They won't. You sound pretty confident. I am. See, the thing about building a house is that you start with a solid foundation. But the thing about destroying one is that you just have to find the weak point and apply pressure. Diana and Theo built their whole plan on a foundation of sand, and now the tide's coming in. As we walked back through the festival, I could hear the whispers following us. Not hostile whispers. These were the satisfied murmurs of a community that had seen justice done. Diana and Theo had overplayed their hand, shown their true colors, and been found wanting. In 5 days, they'd lose the house. But they'd already lost something more important: the respect of their community and any chance of rebuilding their lives in Millbrook. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving people enough rope to hang themselves, then stepping back and watching them tie the knot. The courthouse steps were crowded for a Tuesday morning. Word had gotten around that the Owen house was going up for auction, and in a town the size of Millbrook, a public foreclosure was better entertainment than cable television. Diana's public meltdown at the festival had only added to the spectacle. Everyone wanted to see how this particular story would end. I stood at the back of the crowd, wearing my best suit and the kind of satisfied expression that comes from watching a carefully laid plan reach its inevitable conclusion. Beside me, Rena held a tablet documenting every moment for posterity, while Kenny provided color commentary that would have made a sports announcer proud. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, "we have here a 3-bedroom, 2-bath colonial on Maple Street, recently renovated, with an outstanding mortgage balance of $243,876. Diana and Theo stood near the courthouse entrance, looking like defendants awaiting sentencing. 5 days of frantic searching had failed to produce a miracle solution. No bank would touch them, no private lender would take the risk, and their families had made it clear that a $250,000 bailout was out of the question. "Do I hear an opening bid?" Jim Gold, my attorney, raised his hand. $244,000. It was a strategic bid, just enough to cover the mortgage balance and legal fees, but high enough to discourage casual bidders. In a foreclosure auction, the bank just wants to recover its money. Everything else is gravy. $244,000. Do I hear $250? The crowd looked around expectantly, but no other hands went up. Why would they? The house was nice enough, but not worth more than its mortgage balance to anyone except the people who were about to lose it. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the blue suit for $244,000. Jim Gold nodded to the auctioneer and began the paperwork process. In 30 minutes, he'd transfer ownership to his client, me. The house I'd built with my own hands, improved with my own sweat, and nearly lost to my wife's betrayal was coming home. Diana's wail of anguish could probably be heard 3 blocks away. She collapsed against Theo, who looked like he was about to faint himself. Their dream of easy money and upgraded lifestyle had just faded on the courthouse steps, witnessed by half the town. "Patrick!" Diana pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "Please, there has to be something we can work out." "There was," I replied calmly. 23 years of marriage, we could have worked something out. But you chose a different path. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes." "Yes, they do, and then they live with the consequences." Theo tried to salvage some dignity from the wreckage. "This isn't over, Owen. We'll appeal. We'll find grounds to overturn this." Jim Gold looked up from his paperwork. "Mr. West, I've been practicing law in this state for 30 years. Your client signed a legal contract, defaulted on the terms, and lost the property in a legitimate foreclosure proceeding. There are no grounds for appeal." "There has to be something." "There is. It's called reading the paperwork before you sign it." The crowd was enjoying the show, but I'd seen enough. Diana and Theo's public humiliation was complete. Their financial ruin was absolute, and their reputation in Millbrook was destroyed beyond repair. Justice had been served with a side of poetic irony. "Come on," I told Rena and Kenny. "Let's go home." Home. For the first time in months, that word meant something again. The house looked different when we pulled up. Cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted from its foundation. Diana and Theo's belongings were still inside, but not for long. As the new owner, I had the right to reclaim my property immediately. Kenny's tow truck was joined by 2 more from his company, along with a moving truck I'd rented for the occasion. What had taken Diana and Theo months to move in would be moved out in a matter of hours. "Everything goes," I told the crew. Clothes, furniture, personal items, pack it all up and put it in storage. They can sort it out later. Diana arrived as we were loading the first truck, driving Theo's battered BMW. Apparently, the Jaguar was still out of commission. She looked like she'd aged a decade in the past month, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a sweatshirt, her perfect makeup absent. "Patrick, please, just give us time to find another place." "You've had 30 days to find another place. How much more time do you need?" "We don't have anywhere to go." "That's not my problem anymore, Diana. You made your choice." She watched in silence as the movers carried out the furniture she'd bought with money she didn't have, the clothes she'd purchased for a lifestyle she couldn't afford, the dreams she'd built on a foundation of betrayal and financial irresponsibility. Theo appeared around noon, looking like a man who'd been hit by a truck. His law practice was in shambles, his personal finances were destroyed, and his reputation in town was shot. The Golden Boy attorney had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing business with pleasure. "Owen," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I never intended for things to go this far." "What did you intend, Theo?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching the movers work. "I thought it would be simple. Diana wanted out of the marriage. You'd get a fair settlement. Everyone would move on with their lives. Except you didn't bother to check whether the settlement you had in mind was actually legal." "No, I didn't. That's the difference between us, Theo. I read the fine print. I plan ahead. I think about consequences." I paused, letting that sink in. "You just assumed everything would work out because you wanted it to." By late afternoon, the house was empty, except for my own belongings, which had been carefully stored in the basement during the month of exile. Room by room, I began the process of reclaiming my space, putting things back where they belonged, restoring order to chaos. Rena found me in the kitchen around sunset, sitting at the table where Diana and I had shared thousands of meals over 23 years of marriage. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "Tired," I admitted. "Satisfied, but tired." "Any regrets?" I considered the question seriously. Diana and Theo had lost everything. The house, their savings, their reputation, their future in Millbrook. Their lives were destroyed as thoroughly as if I'd taken a wrecking ball to them. "No," I said finally. "They made their choices. They lived with the consequences. That's how the world works." "What happens now?" "Now? Now I rebuild. Fix what needs fixing, improve what can be improved, and move on with my life." Through the kitchen window, I could see the lights of Millbrook twinkling in the gathering darkness. Somewhere out there, Diana and Theo were probably holed up in a cheap motel, trying to figure out how to salvage something from the wreckage of their ambitions. But that was their problem now, not mine. I'd built this house with my own hands, improved it with my own sweat, and nearly lost it to someone else's greed and betrayal. But in the end, the foundation had held. The structure had survived. And justice, delayed but not denied, had finally been served. In construction, we have a saying, measure twice, cut once. Diana and Theo had cut first and measured never, and now they were living with the consequences of their poor planning. As for me, I was home,